Hello guys, and welcome back to Joe's Ventures. And today we're back with another episode of our Jurassic World Evolution 2 mod spotlights. We take a look at some of the wonderful mods people have been making and compare them to their real life fossil counterparts. And today we've got quite a few new species, so we got very interesting assortment. The fish revolution that kind of happened with Planet Zoo modding is kind of carried over. Leaf has been porting all sorts of fish over to Jurassic World Evolution 2 to go in the lagoons, which is quite fun. But yeah, we're going to get started off today with some proboscideans or some elephants. We're going to be starting off today. This was done by Leaf, Luca, and Johnny V. We have got here the Platybelodon. Let's have a look at these guys. We'll go into first person mode and have a look at these guys, because why not? But here we have Platybelodon. So, Platybelodon, as you can see, is a very interesting looking animal. They're quite similar to our modern elephants. They are actually a proboscidean, which includes a lot of modern elephants, mammoths, mastodons, and kind of their relatives. A lot of those really cool big elephants that we all know and love. These guys, obviously related to that, the species of these guys typically lived around the middle Miocene, so about like 15 to 20 million years ago or so, so a little bit removed from us. And these guys would have been found in places such as the Africa, Asia, and the Caucasus, so quite a wide-ranging group of animals. And there's a few different species of Platybelodon that include kind of Grangri and Devoni, which is the type species. But there is a few different species since they had such a large range and lived over a decent-sized area. But you can see the one thing that really sets them apart from other elephants is their really, really long lower jaw and their kind of weird trunk as well. But we don't know that because that's soft tissue. But really interestingly, they were first believed, like most early depictions of Platybelodon, had these guys like wandering in swamps and using grassy savannas and used their kind of large lower jaw to shovel up a lot of the vegetation. But actually, people have looked at the wear patterns and stuff from Platybelodon specimens, and it suggests that these guys would have used these lower teeth to kind of strip bark off trees, and they may have used those sharpened sizes kind of as a shovel. More like a modern day scythe, so would have been used to kind of like grass branches, and then they rub them against their lower teeth to cut it from a tree. So potentially would have been a great adaptation for browsing, so that's really, really cool. It really shows that often things are not really what they appear. And there's evidence that suggests that these guys would have been, as adults, eat much coarser vegetation than juveniles, which makes sense. So that happens with elephants today. Until obviously they couldn't anymore with their teeth. Be a really, really awesome animal here. They weren't too different, as you can see, from modern elephants. They probably had similar breeding and similar ecologies. We don't really know much about their social structure, things like that. But still really, really awesome animal regardless. How can you not love a Platybelodon? Really, really awesome to see these guys. So that was done by Leaf, Luca, and Johnny V. All did a wonderful job with that. Next, we move on to another proboscidean. As you can see here, we've got by Leaf, Buffsu, and Nicholas Lionrider, we've got the Columbian mammoth. So really, really wonderful guy here. Look at you, how incredible. So let's get back into first person mode. But we've got here the Columbian mammoth. Look how beautiful these guys are. So the Columbian mammoth also known as the imperial mammoth sometimes, or just Mammuthus columbi as a scientific name. These guys are an extinct species of mammoth that lived in North America. They lived from the northern United States down into Costa Rica during the Pleistocene, and they only recently went extinct about 12,000 or 13,000 years ago, like most of the other Pleistocene megafauna. So these guys are also very, very interesting in terms of their size. They're quite big. They're about 4 meters tall at the shoulder, a little bit bigger than a modern African elephant, and weighed believed to be about 10 tons. So on average, slightly bit bigger, though there were bigger mammoths. And you can see some of the major differences between elephants. They have those much larger tusks. They have the sloped back going down there. It really gives them the smaller ears. It really gives them a distinct look from elephants. And not too different from other mammoths here. They've got those large tusks, obviously sloping back, all that. And really, really interesting, guys, as you can see here. They also have very interesting teeth, is that they are similar to elephants. They kind of replace them pretty much constantly until they basically go through their last pair and then they die. So it kind of chinks off. It's a really interesting like conveyor belt of teeth that they've got going. Very interesting adaptation for them. And like modern elephants, these guys, we know from like a lot of preserved remains and stuff like that, these guys would have lived quite similar to modern elephants. They would have lived in herds with females taking care of their young in these matriarchal herds, and then the males would kind of be off doing their own things or living in bachelor herds, which is really, really interesting. And they would have used their trunks to kind of manipulate objects and feed and things like that. And we also know that they would have been prey for some animals, such as, especially young, would have been prey for things like Homotherium and things like that. Especially youngs. And these tusks, these large tusks as you can see here, they would have been used for territorial disputes like fighting and things like that. We actually have a preserved mammoth with their tusks stuck interlocked, so they died while fighting, which is very, very interesting. And as mentioned, we know that from their social behavior, they would have been very social with each other. We have fossil assemblages of herds together with adults and young and things like that, which is really interesting. And from what we know is that it's estimated that these guys would have been eating around 180 kilograms of food per day, and they may have foraged for up to 20 hours a day. And they use their powerful jaw muscles, obviously, to chew all that up. They would have been quite generalist. Mammoths were generally more grazers, but they would still readily eat browse. They were quite generous in that regard. They would just eat whatever they could find, especially since they, from what we know from... they eat a lot of like sage, saltbush and spruce and maple and oak, as we can see as well, but they would eat a lot of grasses as well. Especially from isotopes, it shows they pretty much ate a little bit of everything, which is really, really awesome. And in terms of their life span, these guys would have lived for about 80 years or so, very comparable to modern elephants. And it showed in their growth rings as well that they may have lived that long. They would have continued growing into adulthood. Adult mammoths would stop growing, especially males at about 40 and females at about 25. And similar to modern elephants, they had quite a long gestation period. So they would have a gestation period of about 22 months, which is about 2 years or so, nearly 2 years. And they would have six sets of molars through their lifetime. And by 6 to 12 months, the second set of molars would erupt. And the first set would have been worn at about 18 months of age. And then the third set of molars, and the process would repeat until the sixth set emerged at like 30. And then they would have died because they would have been able to chew. But in terms of the habitat, these guys would have lived across the southern half of the US. They wouldn't get quite as north as the woolly mammoths, but there is evidence of hybridization within woolly and Columbian mammoths that create the imperial or Jefferson's mammoth, which is really, really interesting. And actually, there was a recent study just last year that showed that these guys actually may be descended from a hybrid population of woolly and Columbian mammoths, or steppe and woolly mammoths, to create the Columbian mammoth, which is very, very interesting. And they would have lived in the areas such as the grassland savannas and parkland habitats, and lived with many other species of large megafauna like saber-toothed cats, ground sloths, like Smilodon, camels, a lot of these guys, mastodons, a lot of those species, and potentially in their southern range, other proboscideans such as Curvaeus and like Stegomastodon as well. But in terms of their relationship with humans, they were probably hunted by humans. We have evidence of mammoths being hunted by them. And the reason they went extinct is kind of a very controversial thing. It's one of the big things is what killed the megafauna, the Pleistocene megafauna. And it's basically most of the prominent theories is either human hunting, to whatever extent that was. It was probably not a blitzkrieg, but just killing enough that the population would decline. Potentially, climate change is another big thing, and disease is another big factor. It really could be all of these factors. And all of that would have led to their extinction around 14,000 to 11,000 years ago. And like most other Pleistocene megafauna, sadly went extinct. But luckily we have so many well-preserved remains, especially from like La Brea tar pits and the Waco mammoth site as well. We have quite a good knowledge of the species, even though they are extinct, and so recently as well, doing quite well in understanding the Columbian mammoth. So yeah, really, really awesome mod. It's cool to talk about these wonderful animals. I do love elephants. Really, really cool. So yeah, that was done by Leif Buffsu and Nicholas Lionrider. And now we'll be moving on to all the way off to the lagoons. We've got to move off to lagoons. So we're going to have a look at the zebra shark. So we've got here the lovely zebra shark. We'll wait till them to swim out into the open water so we don't need to worry about. There we are. Let's have a look at you. Yeah. Look at this beautiful guy here. Ooh. There you are. So there's some beautiful. There we are. So you can see the beautiful zebra shark here. These guys are wonderful. So the zebra shark, these guys are a species of carpet shark, and they're typically found in the Indo-Pacific region and coral reefs, things like that. And I know a lot of people think, why are they called zebra sharks when they have all these spots on them? It's really, really weird, but I'll get into that. They live in coral reefs and sandy flats at about 62 meters deep. And adults, you can see they have these 5 ridges going down their body, a low caudal fin and all that, which helps them stay on the bottom of the seabed and things like that. And these guys kind of get their name zebra sharks because the babies actually have a completely different pattern. Usually these babies have these stripes, vertical stripes in the background, and a brown background of their body. So that means they basically almost look like a zebra. And then as they become adults, they get the spotted look, which is really, really interesting. So in terms of their descriptions, you can see they've got a slightly flattened head. These guys are bottom feeders. They kind of feed at the seabed, and they've definitely adapted for it. They've got that really long fin there, the caudal fin, really, really low. That allows them to stay on the bottom of the ocean. Also, these large fins as well allow them to stick to the bottom as well. And they have little barbels, things like that, and they're able to pump water through their gills so they can sit on the bottom of the seafloor. And as I mentioned, these guys, as young, they typically have this really different pattern with these vertical stripes and stuff. And then as they get to about 90 centimeters long, or about 35 inches, these dark areas will break apart and turn into the spotted pattern you kind of see here. And adults can actually get quite big. An adult zebra shark can get about 2.5 meters, or about 8 feet long, with some reports of one getting up to 3 meters, but we really don't know too much about that because people don't really record it properly. As I mentioned, these guys were found in the Indo-Pacific region. They can be found from South Africa into the Red Sea, into the Persian Gulf in India and Southeast Asia, and can be found in New Caledonia and also Northern Australia. And these are bottom-dwelling shark. They typically like to live in intertidal zones around continental and insular shelves. And they frequently, adults and large juveniles, will hang around coral reefs, things like that. And they actually will also sometimes cross oceanic waters using seamounts. And they've been recorded moving up to 140 kilometers per day in individual sharks, which is pretty interesting. And in terms of their ecology, these guys during the day, they're sluggish and can be found on the sea bottom and usually hanging around, and then they will favor certain spots with more oxygenated water as well. They're also quite strong, agile swimmers, as they have a large caudal fin there, and they use an eel-like motion to swim, which is pretty interesting. In terms of their diet, these guys primarily eat mollusks, that they will eat crustaceans, small sea snakes, and even bony fish, things like that. And they use that buccal pumping is what they usually do. So buccal pumping is something that when they suck in prey, so they kind of go and then suck in the prey into their mouths, which is really, really interesting. And they've also been known to prey upon by larger fish and also marine mammals. and things like that. And they're actually unusually social for a shark. They will aggregate in groups of up to 20 to 50 individuals, and there's even been reports of some of like several hundred. And these almost typically consist of a large adult, with females outnumbering males about 3 to 1. No one really knows why they make these aggregations and things like that, but it is kind of possible these guys could be pre-copulatory, or kind of like having a party or something like that. But we really don't know. It could be asserting dominance, things like that. We really don't know why these guys come together like this. And they have a very interesting courtship behavior. These guys the male will bite the female on the pectoral fin as they copulate. And they're oviparous, which means the female will lay egg capsules that can actually get about 17 centimeters, or about 6 inches long, 8 centimeters wide, or 3 inches wide, or 5 centimeters, or 2 inches wide. And these capsules are kind of like a dark brown to purple in color, and they have hair-like filaments that like help them pull down and then hang out in the substrate. And these guys can lay quite a few eggs. A female can lay about 46 eggs over about a 112-day period, and eggs are deposited in about batches of 4, and we don't know their real regional seasonality or reproductive seasonality. But after that, these eggs will hatch after about 4 to 6 months, depending on the temperature. The hatchlings will be about 20 to 36 centimeters, or 7 to 14 inches, with longer tails. And they typically like depths that are a little bit deeper than the adults, and while there's some with like shallow water, and then they typically reach their sexual maturity at about 1.5 to 1.8 meters, or 4 to 5'9", and females about 5'6", or 1.7 meters. And they live quite a long time. They in the wild they can live up to 70. They've been estimated to live to 25 to 30 years in the wild. And they've also known to reproduce by parthenogenesis. So basically, they don't need a male to give birth, which is pretty interesting. And these guys are actually quite friendly. Because they're docile and slow-moving, people can easily approach them, but they have been attacks. Typically, they can get quite accustomed to the humans, and then they'll take food from divers, and they let people like patting them as well. They also do well in captivity, and even some people have been tried to get their way, like private people have them, but obviously for most people they get way too big because they can get up to like 1 meter and 2 meters long. But in terms of their range, they're taken by commercial fisheries using bottom trawlers, things like that, using vitamins and fish oil. But they're considered least concerned, luckily, because they're quite common, but they're much less common than they were. They're still doing well in that regard, and they good habitats, things like that. But there's lots of issues such as pollution, bycatch, obviously catching them for food, coral bleaching, and climate change is another big issue. But as of the moment, they are considered least concerned, so they are doing okay in that regard. So really awesome to see this wonderful little shark. I do love these guys so much. I like it, like I love you. So let them swim off and do their thing. So now we've got here the Arapaima. Oh, that was done by... The shark was done by Leif, Luca, and Zerolomalt or something like that. I've mentioned them before because I've obviously covered these mods before and other mod spotlights, but it's kind of Zevramount or something. But yeah, we're going to move on. Next one done by Leif and Luca. We have got the Arapaima. Let's let you swim out and get in the sunshine. Let's have a look at you. All right, yeah. Really, really beautiful. So we got here the Arapaima. This wonderful guy. So the Arapaima, these guys are a large species of bony tongue in the genus Arapaima. These guys are native to the Amazon and the Esqueno basins in South America. And they're the world's largest freshwater fish, and they can reach as much as 3 meters long, or nearly 10 feet long, which is really, really interesting. And as I mentioned, they typically reach lengths of about more than 2 meters, or about 6'7", and there have been some exceeding over 100 kilograms, though the maximum record is about 200 kilograms, or 440 pounds, the longest report being about 3.7 meters, or about 10 feet. And there have been anecdotal reports of specimens getting up to like 4 meters or so, but obviously that's anecdotal. And you can see here they've got this long torpedo shape to them. They've also got this like greenish and darkish colored, and then they've got the spatting of red down the back there, which looks really, really nice. And these scales also are really interesting because they are mineralized. They have this like hard outer layer, and then they have several layers of collagen, which is actually quite similar to plywood in terms of its structure, which is really, really interesting. And another cool adaptation that they have, because they live in waters that basically to the wet and dry season they travel a lot, they've actually adapted their swim bladder to be able to breathe air, so they can take a breath from the surface and kind of be able to take oxygen from the air, which is really, really cool. And in terms of their diet, these guys are predators. They typically feed on fish, crustaceans, fruits, seeds, insects, and small land animals. And they are able to take advantage of like environments with less water because they can breathe air, and they can live in wetlands and things like that. And they become top predators in these areas. So in terms of reproduction, these guys are greatly affected by seasonal flooding. So typically, the arapaima will lay its eggs in the month where the water levels are really low or they're just beginning to rise. They build a nest that's about 50 centimeters or about 20 inches wide and about 15 centimeters or 5.9 inches deep, usually with muddy bottoms and things like that. And after the water rises, the eggs will hatch and the offspring will have the flood season of May to August, which is prosper. And then they spawn yearly after that, pretty much seasonally as well. Another really interesting thing about these guys as well, these guys are mouth brooders. And the young are protected in the mouth of the mother or of the male till he's older, and then the female arapaima will help protect the male, and the young by circulating them and fending off predators. So the male will have them in his mouth, and then the female protects the male, which is really, really awesome. So really, really interesting fish species. In terms of their relationship to humans, they've been used in kind of like believed to have medicinal qualities and things like that. They also boneless steaks that are considered a delicacy. People do fish them, and they've been raised in aquaculture as well as like a halibut. But they are still considered quite a vulnerable species because of their large size and their slow breeding, and because they must surface to breathe. They're quite vulnerable in that regard. It basically opens them up. It's believed that most populations are kind of overexploited and are quite heavily fished to points where it's almost unsustainable. And it's really unknown. They're considered data deficient because there hasn't been really enough monitoring, but there's a lot of estimates that's believed that these stocks have been in decline due to illegal fishing as well, and also habitat degradation in the Amazon could be a big issue, but they still seem to be doing all right. But really, really cool animals. I do love them. Again, I love an arapaima. Really, really cool species. Let them swim off. Let's see if we can have a look. So next up, we've got an extinct animal here. This is done by Leaf and Lucre as well. We have got a Nomalocaris, a really, really cool animal. So we've got here, let's have a look at you guys. We've got a Nomalocaris. Look how beautiful you guys are. So a Nomalocaris also is known as the kind of abnormal shrimp, where it gets its name. That's what it means in Latin. These guys are a type of radiodont, which were a group of early diverging like stem arthropods. So a really, really early animal found in the Burdish shales, which is really, really awesome. Originally, there were several fossilized parts of it found, like these big claspers that they got here that was thought to be another animal. The mouth was thought to be another animal. But then they figured out it was all one animal. And because Nomalocaris was named first, the animal got the name Nomalocaris, which is really, really interesting. So what's really interesting about these guys is that for the time, these guys lived in the early Cambrian. So this is kind of some of the first like animals kind of found. But when the animals are starting to get big and everything, these guys would have been most likely the top predator of those ecosystems. And for this time, they were gigantic. These guys got about 38 centimeters long, or a little over a foot long, including their foot appendages. And there have been estimates that were up to about a meter long, but they've kind of shrunk that down. And really, really interesting that these guys have these kind of undulating like flaps around their body that helps them swim. They have these large claspers, as you can kind of see here, which were initially considered the shrimp, which they would use to grab prey. And then they have this large mouth at the bottom there that they use to dispatch. Also got these large eyes over here. Let's see if I can get a better look. There we are. There we are. So really, really cool animals there. And these guys also have, believed because of these flaps, they have actually quite a large brain to control them. And they also have these really unusual, like disc-like mouths, which are really used to typically break apart prey. And they would have used these appendages, as you can see, these frontal appendages, these kind of lobes here. They would have been able to grab prey with them and catch them in their jaws and bring them to their mouth, which is really, really interesting. And based on these fossilized eyes as well, it seems these guys were actually had vision that were 30 times more powerful than those of the trilobites, which were long thought to be the most advanced eyes of the time, which is really, really interesting. With about 16,000 lenses, they would have rivaled that of the modern dragonfly, which has 28,000 lenses, which is really, really interesting. And these guys may have actually had diachromatic color vision, which is very, very interesting. It's interesting that we can know so much about a dead animal that died 500 million years ago. So the diet of these guys is believed to be an active predator. So these guys would have been kind of hunting and grabbing prey. They would have grabbed it with their appendages, as I mentioned, bring it to the mouth and eat it. And the long-standing idea that these guys would have been feeding on hard-body animals is questioned. So most likely from like coprolites and things like that. It seems that these guys would have eaten like a lot of soft-body prey, like some of the early fish and many other soft-bodied organisms as well. But they could attack soft trilobites after they're molted, so it's not the end of the world. They're probably, most predators are on a seafood diet. They seafood, they eat it, so it doesn't really bother them. And in terms of the paleoecology, these guys, this particular species, the most famous species, Anomalocaris canadensis, these guys would have lived in the Berda shales in Canada, and these guys would have lived all sorts of different cool animals, like Hallucigenia, many different types of trilobites, Opobinia, some really, really interesting species. One of the most fascinating times in history, I think, is the Cambrian. I just love the Cambrian so much. And these guys would have been feeding on trilobites. Basically, as I mentioned, that seafood diet, pretty much eating what they can. And there's many different species that actually would have lived in quite different environments as well. And some would have lived in Australia, some lived in China, like in Emu Bay. There was believed to be a different species compared to the one in the Berda shales or the one in China, which is really, really awesome. And yeah, I'm a big fan of Anomalocaris. I think it's just such a cool animal. And again, that was done by Leaf and Buffsu, so cool to have. This is basically the earliest animal we've had in the game yet, by the looks of it. Beats out the Dimetrodons, so yeah, we're going to let these guys go off and live their lives. And then we're going to move to our next animal here. Everyone's favorite big, bad shark we've got here. We've got the great hammerhead shark. And by Leaf. So let's let them swim out and do their thing, and then we will take a picture. So we have the great hammerhead shark. Ooh, that's not what we wanted. Let's just get a bit of pose. There we are. So we have here the great hammerhead shark. So these guys are the largest species of hammerhead sharks, and they belong in the family Cephiridae. These guys are very, very interesting. These guys can be found pretty much all over the world, and especially tropical waters. They can be found from North Carolina to Uruguay and even the Gulf of Mexico, the Indian Ocean. They can be found in Australia, New Caledonia, Peru, and Sierra Leone, places like that. But they have not been confirmed in some of those areas. Great hammerheads may also be found in inshore waters less than a meter deep, or a depth of about 80 meters offshore. They typically favor coral reefs, but they will inhabit coastal shelves, island terraces, lagoons, and deep waters, and they're also quite migratory. So the big thing that people really notice about the great hammerhead shark is its great hammerhead. So this is typically considered a cephalofoil, is the technical term, and these guys actually have lots and lots of sensory organs, little nerves on the cephalofoil that basically allow them to detect. It basically allows them to detect the electricity or movement in the water from fish and be able to detect whether they're, or even, since typically they're mostly bottom feeders, these guys will get like stingrays in the bottom of and hiding in the substrate. They can basically feel their muscles or the movement of the water, which is really, really cool. It's almost like a super sense, like a spidey sense almost. But yeah, these guys are really, really interesting in that regard. It really gives them an interesting shape, and then they have these really tall pectoral fins as well, and pectoral fins, the dorsal fin, and really interesting caudal fin. Really, really cool species, and you can see they've got all those teeth in there. Really, really awesome. So, in terms of their size, these guys typically reach about 3.5 meters long and weigh over 230 kilograms, or about 510 pounds and 11 feet long. Though the maximum has been recorded is about 4.6 meters, or about 15 feet long. And a small percentage of the population, which is mostly the females. Females get quite big, they get the largest. The longest great hammerhead recorded was about 20 feet long, or about 6 meters. Though the heaviest known was about 4.4 meters long, or about 14 feet, and she weighed about 580 kilograms. But it's believed to be, because she was so heavy, she was actually pregnant with about 55 neonatal pups. So that could have been the reason why she was so heavy. So these guys are a solitary, nomadic predator. They tend to be given a wide berth by other sharks. Juveniles have been preyed upon by like bull sharks, and except for killer whales, these guys have no real large predators. And in terms of feeding, these guys have quite a varied diet, but they're known to feed on invertebrates like octopus, squids, and all sorts of bony fish like groupers, porcupine fish, toadfish, and even smaller sharks such as smoothhounds. And they'll even prey on grey reef sharks as well. And there's actually evidence of, in Panama, there's fossil evidence that hammerhead sharks may have been preying on young megalodon or juvenile megalodon, which is actually really, really interesting. It really shows a little bit the ecology. But these guys are apex predators among sharks, and they typically specialize on feeding on other sharks, rates, and scays, especially stingrays. And because of this receptory organ on the cephalofoil there, that basically allows them to also turn quickly to catch prey that they might find in the substrate, and also allows them to feel things like that. And they can detect like the electrical signals of stingrays buried in the sand. And it's just really interesting. They also have a particularly keen sense of smell, which allows them to find their prey, which is really, really awesome. And another function of the cephalofoil has been observed is they actually knock the ray to the sea bottom with a powerful blow from above, and they use the head to basically pin it, and while pivoting as well, which is really, really interesting. It's a way for them to basically stay away and pick out the jaws, and then they shake the head, things like that, which is really, really interesting. In terms of their life history, these guys are considered viviparous, which means the young will develop in the stomach with a yolk, and the yolk sac will be transformed into a structure that's analogous to the placenta in mammals, which is really, really cool. And unlike most other species which mate near the sea bottom, these guys mate near the surface. And in one account in the Bahamas, they actually were mating alongside each other, mating as they reach the surface. Females will typically breed every 2 years, giving birth to late spring and summer in the Northern Hemisphere, and December to January in Australian waters, where they have a gestation period of about 11 months. The litter size will range from about 6 to 55 pups, though 20 to 40 is the typical kind of amount. The young will measure about 50 to 70 centimeters or 19 to 27 inches at birth, with males reaching sexual maturity at about 2.3 to 2.8 meters or 7 to 9 feet long and 51 kilograms or 11 pounds. Females are typically a little bit bigger. They get about 2.5 to 3 meters or 8 to 9 feet or nearly 10 feet long, about 41 kilograms or 90 pounds. And the young and the adults actually differ. They typically have a rounded frontal margin on the head. And these guys are actually quite long-lived. It's believed to be a typical lifespan for a shark as a great hammerhead is about 20 to 30 years, with a female living up to 40 or 50 potentially. So that's really, really interesting. So these guys are often regularly caught both commercially and recreationally in the tropics, both for like shark fin soup, which is really terrible if you think about it. Also for vitamins, things like that. And this has really made big impacts on their conservation status. The great hammerhead, these typically very, very vulnerable to overfishing. And while they are still quite common, so to speak, these guys, because of these issues, they're considered critically endangered, which sucks. So they're considered because the population is believed to decline between 50 and 70% because of overfishing. And there's other issues such as climate change, overfishing, both bycatch and attentional catch, shark fin soup, things like that. And they're generally considered high risks just because they're such slow breeders. As I mentioned, they only get pregnant every 2 years and only have a few pups, and only a few of those pups survive and things like that. And being long-lived, that basically puts a target on their back, which sucks. But luckily, there are efforts to protect them. A lot of places they are protected, and really, really awesome shark. And people do love sharks. Some people hate them, but there's definitely a lot of people that love them. Really, really interesting species. How you got love a cool hammerhead. But yeah, really awesome to see them in Planet Zoo as well. Leaf did a wonderful job bringing this guy into Jurassic World Evolution 2. So yeah, that's really, really awesome to see. So last, and most definitely not least, we're going to be going to a new species. This species was actually just described, I believe, this year, which is a really, really interesting year, 2022. So a really cool new animal that we get to look at. So new big theropod. I know everyone loves the big theropods. We got by Furlong. We've got this new species, Mappy macrothorax. So a MAPE, I believe you say that, MAPE macrothorax. So let's have a look at this guy. Let's have a look at MAPE macrothorax. Look at this wonderful guy here. So, MAPE, these guys are a large megaraptorid. So, we always love our representation for the megaraptorids. These guys are theropod from the late Cretaceous Corallo Formation from Santa Cruz in Argentina, with a single species, MAPE macrothorax, known from this incomplete skeleton, but is actually believed to be the largest megaraptorid in South America and potentially the largest megaraptorid known. So that's really given it, it's basically like our big new species, really cool to talk about. And it was discovered by Alex Ronaldo in Santa Cruz in 2019. It was found disarticulated, but the known fossil material includes several dorsal and caudal vertebrae, some gastralia, some metatarsal, things like that. Kind of know a bit of it. And there are some that I believe that's undescribed. It's potentially, and is, believe it or not, even though it's that disarticulated, it's actually potentially one of the more complete, or the most complete megaraptorids found, because megaraptorids are kind of notoriously known for being a little bit elusive, which is really interesting. And when it was described in 2022, its name is MAPE, which is from the local kind of mythology. And Nicotech, I believe you say that. Its mythology means kind of the shadow of death, or kills with cold wind, kind of one of those typical edgy dinosaur names, but with obviously indigenous twist, which I always love. And the scientific name, or the species name, macrothorax, just basically means long chest, because it's noted that it has quite a large thoracic cavity. So it has quite a, obviously, big, bulky body, as you can kind of see here, which is really, really interesting. So, really, really interesting animal. These guys are estimated to be quite big. This has been basically estimated to be about 9 to 10 meters long, or about 30 to 33 feet long in life. And as this size, if this size is correct, which is probably most definitely is, this would have made it the largest member of the megaraptorids currently known. So basically, megaraptorid, like almost approaching the size of T-Rex, which is really, really interesting. And members of the megaraptorid has increased their body length after the extinction of the Carcharodontosaurids in southern hemisphere during the early late Cretaceous. So it's believed typically that as the Carcharodontosaurids went extinct, the megaraptorins got bigger to basically take that niche, almost like in the northern parts where Tyrannosaurs kind of took that role, which is really interesting. And it's also the hypothesized that the absence of these large apex predators allowed other theropods to diversify. And these guys, along with Balisaurids and Unilagings, which are a type of dromaeosaur, they would have become primary predators in this kind of ecosystem. And they typically would have ranged... the other members of its clade typically range between 4 or 5 meters, and then they got bigger up to 6 meters. And like things like Australovenator, things like that. And the other ones smaller than this, the kind of the latest known kind of South American megaraptorids got about 6 to 7 meters. And there were still some forms in the Maastrichtian that kind of got the biggest, which includes MAPE, because MAPE's known from the Maastrichtian, which is basically the end of the Cretaceous. They got to that largest extent of the megaraptorid size before all the dinosaurs, except the birds, went extinct. But yeah, really, really awesome guys here. How can you not love this guy here? There's also traces. Let's get out of here. Let's watch it move. I want to watch it move a bit. So let's get first person view. So in terms of its preserved ribs as well. It shows that they had attachment points for ligaments. And it's actually been interpreted that these guys would have had, similar to most other theropods, and potentially most other like saurischiid dinosaurs, which include sauropods, these guys would have had a breathing system, a respiratory system, much more similar to that of birds rather than crocodiles, which is really, really cool. And would really help them, especially being much more active, which is really, really cool. So in terms of classification, these guys, as I mentioned, are Megaraptorina, which are quite famous for these large claws that you can see here. Megaraptorins themselves, we really don't know where they are placed on the tree because of, as I mentioned, basically taxonomy being taxonomy. But most people kind of think they're kind of a Coelurosaur, or closely related to like Tyrannosaurs, a sister taxon to Tyrannosaurus. But Maip would have been closely related to animals like Arosa titan, which also is quite well preserved. Evidence for like air sacs, things like that, and also Oriciraptor and those kind of guys there, which is really interesting. And in terms of paleoecology, these guys I mentioned found on Maastrichtians, so right at the end of the Cretaceous. They would have lived with animals such as Arastocursor. They would have lived with Nullotitan, which is a type of sauropod, and also some other like hadrosaurs, things like that. There's also indeterminate remains of animals such as ankylosaurs, iguanodontians, noasaurids, unilagings, and hadrosaurids living in that formation. So they would have had plenty of prey to live off, and really cool to really hope that we get to see them described in the future and kind of flesh out this ecosystem, because we really don't know that much about the latest kind of Cretaceous in these areas, which is really cool. And there's also remains from things like frogs, fish, mammals, snakes, turtles, and gastropods, which is really, really interesting. Let's have a look at you sleeping there. And there's also some other remains that could belong to, of a Megaraptor, that could belong to Maip or another taxon, potentially a smaller taxon of Megaraptorids. So it's very possible that there could be more than one Megaraptorid in the formation that Maip was from. Yeah, really, really awesome animal. I love how Furlong really gave this new species kind of a really interesting look, and obviously basically just made the Carcharodontosaurus and JWE better. And I love kind of the spikes and a little bit of feathers as well, since they're generally considered a Coelurosaur. So yeah, really, really awesome. I'm a big fan of Maip. It's one of my cool favorite dinosaurs because it just teaches us so much. It's like Stegosaurus as well, which is really, really awesome. And yeah, big fan. So yeah, I think this would be a great place to end the video. So I really hope you guys enjoyed this video. Hope you guys like and subscribe. Always remember to hit the little bell icon to get notified about anything. So yeah, hopefully you guys enjoyed this video. Hope you guys like and subscribe, and bye-bye.